I never had that special sisterly bond you see in movies or read about in books. Jessica was already 10 years old when I came along, practically a different generation. While she was experiencing her first crushes in high school, I was still playing with dolls. Our parents, like many who have children far apart, seemed to hold a special place in their hearts for their firstborn. Jessica could do no wrong in their eyes, and that pattern continued well into our adult years. When I turned 18 and started college in our hometown, Jessica was getting married to David, a local accountant she'd met at church. I remember her wedding day clearly. She was glowing with happiness, and our parents couldn't stop crying tears of joy. I was just relieved I could live at home while attending college, to save money. Little did I know what that decision would cost me. Jessica wasted no time settling into her role as a housewife. Within months of the wedding, she announced her pregnancy. "Isn't it wonderful, Robin?" she gushed. "You're going to be an aunt." I smiled and nodded, not realizing this announcement would completely derail my college experience. 3 months after little Tommy was born, Jessica started showing up at our parents' house unannounced. "I just need a break," she'd say, practically throwing Tommy into Mom's arms. "I'll be back in a few hours. Robin's home anyway, she can help." I'd be in my room, surrounded by textbooks and notes, when Mom would knock on my door. "Robin, honey, could you watch Tommy while I make dinner?" It became a daily routine. My study time was constantly interrupted by a crying baby and my mother's gentle but persistent requests for help. I tried to balance everything, but it was exhausting. Then, just when I thought I had somewhat adjusted to the situation, Jessica dropped another bombshell during Sunday dinner. "We're having another baby," she announced. "Tommy's going to be a big brother." 2 years later, I was in my final year of college, trying desperately to prepare for my exams while dealing with both 3-year-old Tommy running wild through the house and baby Michael screaming at the top of his lungs. "Jessica," I said one afternoon, after she'd dropped both kids off so she could go to the movies with her friends, "have you considered hiring a babysitter?" She looked at me like I'd suggested she sell her children. "Do you know how expensive babysitters are these days?" she scoffed. "Besides, why should we pay someone when we have family who can watch them for free?" Our mother, who was currently chasing Tommy as he ran through the house with her reading glasses, just nodded absently. Of course she didn't mind. Jessica was her precious firstborn, and she'd never deny her anything. Meanwhile, our house had turned into complete chaos. Tommy treated every room like his personal playground, leaving a trail of destruction wherever he went. One morning, I woke up to find he'd emptied all my college folders onto the floor and used my notes as drawing paper. Baby Michael's piercing screams provided a constant soundtrack to the mayhem. "Robin," Mom called out one afternoon, her voice strained. "Please come help with the boys. I can't handle them anymore today." I heard something crash downstairs, followed by Tommy's gleeful giggling. "I can't, Mom," I shouted back through my locked door. "I have finals next week." "You're being selfish." Dad's voice joined the chaos. "These are your nephews. Family helps family." I turned up my music to drown out their voices and the sound of another crash downstairs. My hands were shaking as I highlighted important passages in my textbook. I felt guilty, but I also knew that if I didn't pass these exams, my whole future would be affected. The next few weeks were tense, but I managed to graduate with honors despite the constant disruptions. My first priority after securing a job at Anderson & Associates was finding my own place. The starting salary wasn't huge, but it was enough to rent a small one-bedroom apartment across town. That first night in my apartment was the most peaceful I'd experienced in years. No screaming, no crying, no chaos, just blessed silence. 2 years passed, and I'd managed to create a comfortable life for myself. Then came the news of Jessica's third pregnancy. "It's another boy," Mom told me during one of our weekly phone calls. "Isn't it wonderful?" "Yeah, wonderful," I said, already imagining the increased chaos. "How are you and Dad handling Tommy and Michael these days?" Mom sighed. "They're energetic. Jessica still brings them over every weekend." Says she needs a break. Now with another baby coming. Her voice trailed off, and I could hear the exhaustion she was trying to hide. During my next visit home, I found my parents looking older than their years. Tommy and Michael were racing through the house, playing some game that seemed to involve throwing all the couch cushions on the floor. Jessica had just dropped them off before heading to brunch with friends. "Mom, Dad," I said carefully, watching them chase after the boys, "you know you don't have to do this, right? You can say no to Jessica." Dad turned to me, his face red with either exertion or anger. "That's such a selfish thing to say, Robin. This is what family does." "There's nothing selfish about setting boundaries," I argued. "You both look exhausted." "You don't understand what family means," Mom snapped, even as she picked up another cushion from the floor. "You've never understood. When you have children of your own, you'll get it." I left their house that day feeling frustrated and sad. It seemed like nothing had changed. Jessica was still taking advantage, our parents were still enabling her, and I was still the bad guy for pointing out the obvious. Over time, my weekend visits home became increasingly difficult to endure. Each time I walked through my parents' door, I found myself stepping into what felt like a war zone. Tommy, now 5, and Michael, 3, had developed a particularly nasty habit of turning mealtimes into food fights, with 6-month-old Kevin, their youngest brother, usually ending up as their unwilling target. One Sunday lunch was especially horrible. I watched in horror as Tommy loaded his spoon with mashed potatoes and launched it across the table at Michael, who retaliated with a handful of green peas. Kevin, caught in the crossfire, ended up with baby food dripping down his face, sobbing while his older brothers laughed. I couldn't take it anymore. "Enough." I slammed my hand on the table, making everyone jump. "Tommy, Michael, get over here right now." They stared at me, unused to being confronted. "Look at this mess you've made," I pointed to the food-splattered floor and walls. "And look at your brother crying. This is unacceptable. You're going to clean this up, now." To everyone's surprise, including my own, they actually started cleaning. Maybe it was the shock of someone finally standing up to them. That's when Jessica burst through the door, returning from her weekly spa appointment. "What's going on here?" she demanded, seeing her older boys on their hands and knees wiping the floor. "They made a mess at lunch," I explained. "They're cleaning it up." Jessica's face turned red. "How dare you? They're just children. You're being cruel to them." "Cruel?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Jessica, they were throwing food at Kevin. He was crying. This isn't okay behavior." "You don't have children," she spat. "You don't understand anything." I looked at our parents, hoping they'd back me up, but they just sat there, looking tired and defeated. I couldn't understand why they wouldn't stand up to Jessica, why they kept letting her take advantage of their kindness. Life went on like this for 3 more years, with me limiting my visits home to avoid the chaos. Then everything changed when I met James. He was nothing like anyone I'd dated before. Smart, kind, and most importantly, he understood the importance of boundaries. We met at a coffee shop near my office. He'd accidentally taken my latte, and we ended up talking for hours. After 6 months of dating, we introduced each other to our families. His parents, Robert and Diana, were lovely people who raised their voices about as often as they burned dinner, which was never. The contrast between their peaceful home and my parents' chaos was striking. Christmas had always been a big deal in our family, and this year was supposed to be extra special since James and I were newly engaged. Mom went all out with the decorations. The tree was beautiful, presents were wrapped perfectly in matching paper, and the house smelled amazing with all her holiday baking. When James and I arrived early to help, the atmosphere was festive and warm. My cousins Mark and Sarah were already there with their kids, who were quietly playing board games in the corner. Several of our relatives had traveled from out of town, including Great Aunt Martha, who immediately pulled me into a tight hug. "Let me see that ring, dear," she said, admiring my engagement ring. "James is such a lovely young man. You two will be so happy together." Everything was picture perfect. Mom had outdone herself with the food, Dad was telling his favorite stories, and even the kids were well behaved, saying please and thank you when offered cookies. It felt like a scene from a Christmas movie. Then the front door burst open. "Merry Christmas!" Jessica's voice rang out, but it was immediately drowned by the sound of her 3 boys storming into the house like a hurricane. Tommy, now 8, immediately ran straight into Great Uncle George, nearly knocking him over. Michael, 6, started chasing his cousins, who had been quietly reading on the couch. 3-year-old Kevin was screaming at the top of his lungs, for no apparent reason. "Boys will be boys," Jessica laughed, while her husband David stared at his phone, completely checked out of the situation. Before anyone could stop them, Tommy and Michael discovered the presents under the tree. They didn't just look at them or shake them, they started ripping them open. All of them. Even the ones that weren't for them. "Oh my goodness," Great Aunt Martha gasped as Tommy tore through a carefully wrapped package meant for my cousin's daughter. "I think I need to leave. This is too much excitement for me." She wasn't the only one. Within 20 minutes, half of our elderly relatives had made their excuses and left, unable to handle the chaos that my nephews were creating. The dinner that followed was even worse. My cousin's children sat quietly, using their napkins and waiting their turns to speak. In stark contrast, my nephews turned the dinner table into a battlefield. Tommy and Michael were throwing dinner rolls at each other across the table, while Kevin was smearing cranberry sauce in his hair. "Children, please," Mom pleaded weakly, but they ignored her completely. The breaking point came when Tommy, with a mischievous grin, deliberately picked up his can of soda and poured it all over Mom's special Christmas pie, the one she'd spent hours making that morning. "Tommy," several voices shouted at once. But Jessica just laughed. "He's just being playful," she said, while David continued scrolling on his phone. I looked around the table at my relatives' faces, the shock, the disapproval, the discomfort, while my sister and her husband sat there acting like this was perfectly normal behavior. I couldn't take it anymore. The sight of my mother's ruined pie, the chaos, the complete lack of discipline, it was all too much. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I can't stay here," I announced, my voice shaking with anger. "This is ridiculous. Your children are behaving disgustingly, Jessica, and you're doing nothing about it." The table fell silent, except for the sound of Kevin banging his spoon against his plate. Jessica's face turned red. "Oh, that's rich coming from you," she snapped. "You don't have children, Robin. You have no idea how hard it is to raise kids. When you have your own, then you can judge my parenting." I let out a bitter laugh and gestured toward my cousin's children, who were sitting quietly, looking uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Really? Then how do you explain them? Sarah and Mark's kids have been perfectly well behaved all day. They use their manners, they don't destroy things, they don't throw food. How is that possible if children are supposedly impossible to control?" "Those kids are just different," Jessica sputtered. "No, the difference is that Sarah and Mark actually parent their children," I shot back. "When was the last time you made your kids face any consequences for their actions?" Jessica's eyes welled up with tears. "You're so cruel. You've always hated my children." "I don't hate them," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I hate watching them grow up without any guidance or discipline. I hate seeing Mom and Dad's house destroyed every time you visit. I hate that you think this behavior is normal." James stood up beside me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "I think we should go," he said quietly. Jessica was full-on crying now, while her boys continued their chaos, completely unfazed by the drama unfolding around them. David finally looked up from his phone, seeming mildly annoyed by the disruption. "Merry Christmas, everyone," I said, my voice thick with sarcasm. "Sorry, Mom, but I just can't watch this anymore." James and I left to the sound of Jessica's sobs and Tommy's triumphant yell as he launched another dinner roll across the room. 2 months later, we were sitting in our apartment, working on the wedding guest list. The Christmas disaster was still fresh in our minds as we looked at the names. We can't invite the boys, I said finally, voicing what we were both thinking. They'll ruin everything. Can you imagine them during the ceremony? During the reception? James nodded. What if we just make it completely child-free? No kids under 16, period. That way it's not personal, it's just a blanket policy. You don't think people will be offended? Some might be, he admitted. But if it applies to everyone equally, it's harder to argue with. Sarah and Mark might be disappointed their kids can't come, but at least they'll understand it's not targeted at them specifically. I thought about the peaceful ceremony we'd been planning. No chaos, no food fights, no screaming children. Just an elegant celebration of our love, surrounded by mature guests who could actually appreciate the moment. A child-free wedding, I repeated, trying out the words. You know what? I actually love it. I chose a Sunday afternoon to break the news to my family. In retrospect, maybe I should have done it when Jessica and her kids weren't there, but finding them absent from our parents' house was like trying to catch lightning in a bottle. As soon as I walked in, I had to dodge a remote control flying through the air, thrown by Tommy while chasing Michael. Kevin was crying on the floor because his brothers had knocked over his blocks for the third time. Mom, Dad, I started, raising my voice over the chaos. Jessica, I need to talk to you all about the wedding. Sure, honey, Mom said, trying to clean up juice that Kevin had spilled on the carpet. I took a deep breath. James and I have decided to make the wedding child-free. No children under 16 will be attending. The chaos stopped for approximately 2 seconds before Jessica erupted. What? She screamed, jumping up from the couch. You can't do that. What about my boys? The policy applies to all children, I explained, trying to keep my voice calm. Not just yours. This is because you hate them. Jessica was turning red now, her voice getting louder with each word. You've always hated my children. You're a horrible aunt, a horrible sister. No, I love your boys, I insisted, even as Tommy chose that moment to knock over a vase. But you saw what happened at Christmas. The food fights, the presents being torn open, the ruined pie. That was just kids being kids. No, Jessica, it wasn't. Mark and Sarah's kids were there too, remember? They didn't destroy anything. They didn't ruin Christmas for everyone else. Oh, here we go again with the perfect cousin's perfect children, Jessica screamed. Well, you know what? You won't have to worry about my disruptive children at your precious wedding, because we won't be there at all. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. That's your choice, I said quietly. If you'd rather not come to my wedding than attend without your children, that's up to you. Jessica stared at me for a moment, her mouth open in shock. Then she started gathering her kids' things, shoving toys into bags. Come on, boys, she yelled. We're leaving. Your Aunt Robin doesn't want you in her life anymore. That's not what I said, I started, but she was already herding the boys toward the door. I hope you're happy with your perfect, quiet wedding, she spat over her shoulder. Then she slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. After Jessica stormed out, I turned to my parents, expecting to find understanding in their faces. After all, they'd been dealing with my nephew's chaos for years. Instead, I found them looking at me with disappointment. How could you, Robin? Mom's voice was quiet but sharp. Those are your nephews. Mom, you've seen how they behave, I said, incredulous. You saw what happened at Christmas. They're just children, Dad jumped in. You're being incredibly selfish. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Selfish? How is it selfish to want my wedding day to be peaceful? One day that I want to be perfect, without food fights or screaming or chaos. Dad's face hardened. Then you need to reconsider your decision. Either invite your nephews, or we won't be attending either. The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked at their faces, these parents who had watched their house be destroyed countless times, who looked older than their years from the stress of handling 3 unruly boys, who were now threatening to miss their younger daughter's wedding because she wanted one peaceful day. Fine, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. That's your choice. Don't come. I left their house and drove straight to James's place. When I told him and his parents what had happened, they immediately rallied around me. You're absolutely right to want a peaceful wedding, Diana, my future mother-in-law, assured me. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty about that. That evening, I made it official. I posted the announcement on Facebook. James and I are excited to announce that our wedding will be a child-free celebration. We look forward to sharing our special day with our adult guests in an elegant, peaceful atmosphere. The support was overwhelming. Cousins, friends, and even distant relatives liked and commented with their approval. Sarah, my cousin, wrote, "Completely understand. We'll arrange a sitter for the kids. Can't wait to celebrate with you." Then Jessica commented, "Shame on you, Robin. You're tearing this family apart with your selfishness. You've always been jealous of my children and now you're excluding them from this important family event. I hope you're happy with yourself." The response was immediate and unexpected. Relatives who had witnessed the Christmas disaster jumped to my defense. "Jessica, your kids destroyed the Christmas celebration," Aunt Linda wrote. "They ruined presents that weren't theirs, threw food, and drove half the family to leave early. Maybe instead of attacking Robin, you should focus on teaching your children how to behave in public," Great Aunt Martha chimed in. Comment after comment appeared, each one recounting another instance of my nephew's bad behavior and Jessica's lack of parenting. The post turned into a catalog of years of chaos and destruction, all of which Jessica had dismissed or ignored. Jessica's responses stopped abruptly. For once, she had nothing to say in defense of her children's behavior, perhaps because, for the first time, she was facing unified opposition from the entire family. My phone rang 3 days after the Facebook post explosion. When I saw Mom on the caller ID, my stomach tightened, but I answered anyway. "Robin?" Mom's voice was soft. "Your father and we saw your post." And all the comments. We had no idea so many people felt this way. Seeing everyone describe what happened at Christmas, and all the other occasions. "We'll be at your wedding, honey," Dad chimed in. "With or without your sister. You deserve your perfect day." The relief was overwhelming. "Thank you," I managed to say through my tears. "That means everything to me." After that conversation, I sent Jessica and David a formal wedding invitation with a handwritten note. "I would love to have you both there to celebrate with us. I know it's difficult without the boys, but this is important to me. Love, Robin." Weeks passed without a response. As the RSVPs rolled in, Jessica's silence became her answer. The wedding day itself was everything I'd dreamed of. The ceremony was peaceful and elegant, without a single interruption. During the reception, adults could actually have conversations without shouting over chaos. No food was thrown, no decorations were destroyed, no one cried except my mom, happy tears as she watched us exchange our vows. "This is lovely," Great Aunt Martha told me during the reception. "So dignified, so peaceful." James squeezed my hand under the table. He knew I was thinking about the empty seats where Jessica and David should have been. A week after we returned from our honeymoon, Mom called with news. "Jessica hasn't brought the boys over since your wedding," she said. "I tried to call her, but she won't answer." "She's punishing you for coming to my wedding," I said quietly. "Maybe," Mom sighed. "But you know what? For the first time in years, your father and I feel rested. Our house is still clean at the end of the day. Maybe this isn't entirely a bad thing." I understood what she meant. Sometimes relationships need to break before they can be rebuilt properly. Perhaps this was our family's breaking point, the moment when we finally stopped pretending everything was fine and acknowledged the problems that had been growing for years. I still hope that one day Jessica will understand that my wedding wasn't about excluding her children, it was about having one day of peace. I hope she'll realize that her boys' behavior isn't normal or acceptable, and that letting them run wild isn't doing them any favors. I hope that someday we can rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. Until then, I have my memories of a perfect wedding day, surrounded by people who understood and supported my choice. I have my new husband and his loving family. And I have the knowledge that sometimes standing up for yourself, even when it's difficult, even when it hurts, is the right thing to do.
Shame on you for firing someone who simply wanted to help a veteran. Linda was a kind-hearted hairstylist who offered a free haircut to a struggling veteran. Her generous act of kindness cost her job, but it didn't go unnoticed. Just 30 minutes later, an unexpected visitor arrived at the salon, changing Kelly's life forever. Hi everyone, welcome. Today, I'm excited to share a new story with you. Let's dive in. Linda, a young woman in her late 20s, worked at a beauty salon. While her peers pursued high-flying careers, Linda chose to become a hairstylist, a passion she had nurtured since childhood. Despite her parents' disapproval and insistence on a more traditional career path, Linda followed her heart. She dreamt of one day owning her own salon, even though the job offered modest earnings. When she was just 19, Linda's parents kicked her out of the house for refusing to attend college and study engineering, as her father had wanted. Fortunately, within weeks, she found a job at Mara's beauty salon, where she worked for 6 years. Linda lived in a small town where everyone knew each other, and news spread quickly. Mara's beauty salon was one of the largest in town, with over 50% of the townspeople getting their hair done there. But it wasn't just the salon size that drew customers, it was Linda. She was passionate about her work, always cheerful, kind, and had a great sense of humor. Linda made sure every customer felt welcome, providing top-notch service and remembering the names of her clients and their children, if they had any. She genuinely cared about the people she served. One summer day, Linda arrived at the salon around 8:00 a.m. as usual, but decided to make a quick stop at a street coffee stand first. At the stand, she bumped into Jason, a man in his early 40s who had once served in the military. Everyone in town knew Jason's story, how he struggled to adapt to civilian life after years of service, and how his wife had divorced him shortly after his return. Jason's life had spiraled downward after the divorce. He became depressed, lost touch with reality, and was unable to keep a job or take care of himself. Most days, he relied on the kindness of the townspeople for support. That day, like many others, Jason was dressed scruffily, with unkempt hair and beard. "Hey Jason, how are you doing today?" Linda asked in an excited tone as she spotted him at the coffee stand. "Hi, Linda. I'm fine. It's great to see you again," Jason responded with a smile. "Want some coffee?" Linda offered. "Oh, I wouldn't want to be a bother," Jason replied hesitantly. "Come on, we're friends, Jason. Why would you be a bother?" Linda chuckled, then turned to the coffee vendor and asked for another cup of coffee for Jason. Shortly after, Jason's coffee was ready. The two of them grabbed their cups and began walking toward the salon, which was just a short distance away. As they walked, Linda and Jason chatted about everyday things, and Linda could tell that her small gesture had lifted Jason's spirits. He sounded happier, and his smile came more easily. When they arrived at the front of the salon, Jason thanked Linda again for the coffee and was about to say goodbye when Linda stopped him. "One more thing, Jason. If you're free later today, why don't you come by the salon? I'll give you a haircut. It's on me," Linda said with a wide smile. "Oh no, you don't have to. You've already done more than enough," Jason said, taken aback by her generosity. "I insist, Jason. It's on me. Come by whenever you're free. I'll be waiting for you," Linda replied warmly. "Thank you so much, Linda. I'll come by later today," Jason said gratefully before walking away. After opening the salon for the day, Linda couldn't stop thinking about Jason and how much his life had changed. Once a man the whole town admired and looked up to as a hero, Jason's life had taken a downturn after he left the military. Later that afternoon, Linda had just finished attending to a customer when Jason walked into the salon. As soon as she was done, she asked Jason to sit down, wrapped a neck strip around his collar, and draped the cape over him. About 10 minutes into the haircut, Linda's boss, Mrs. Sidney, a woman in her early 40s, walked into the salon. Known throughout the town as a rude businesswoman who cared only about money and never about others' feelings, Sidney's presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. At first, when Sidney saw Linda attending to Jason, she didn't say a word. Instead of heading to her office, Sidney took a seat near Jason, silently watching them. When Linda finally finished cutting Jason's hair and shaving his beard, Jason thanked her sincerely and was about to leave when Sidney spoke up. "Jason, where's your payment?" Sidney demanded. Linda quickly intervened. "About that, you can take it out of my paycheck. I wanted to treat him." "No, Linda. I can't allow that," Sidney replied coldly. "I didn't build this business by giving away free haircuts to people who can't afford to pay." "No, ma'am, you're mistaken," Linda explained. "Jason didn't come here on his own. I invited him to give him a haircut. I saw him earlier today, and I don't care if you saw him today or 10 years ago." Sidney cut her off, her voice rising. "If Jason doesn't pay for that haircut, then you're fired." "Please, it hasn't come to that. Let me," Jason began, trying to mediate. "There's no need, Jason. You can go ahead. I'll join you shortly," Linda said calmly, reassuring him. With a heavy heart, Jason reluctantly walked out of the salon. As Jason left, some townspeople noticed he looked unusually downcast. Concerned, a woman approached him. "Jason, is everything all right?" "No, everything's not all right," Jason replied in a sad and defeated tone. "The nice salon lady gave me a free haircut, and her boss fired her for it." "You're not serious, are you?" a man standing nearby asked, shocked. "I know Linda. She's a good person. Why would her boss do that?" As Jason tried to explain what had happened, more people gathered around, curious about the commotion. When they heard the story, their outrage grew, and soon the news spread like wildfire through the town. Somehow, the news reached the mayor. Hearing that Linda was being punished for her kindness, the mayor decided to take action. Meanwhile, back at the salon, Linda was cleaning up, unaware of the storm brewing outside. She had no idea that Jason had told so many people about her boss firing her for her act of kindness. 30 minutes after Jason left the salon, the mayor walked in with Jason by his side, just as Linda was about to grab her bag and leave. As soon as Sidney, Linda's boss, saw the mayor, she rushed over to greet him. Outside, Linda and Jason could see a crowd gathering behind the mayor. "Welcome, Mr. Mayor. To what do we owe this pleasant surprise?" Sidney asked, trying to sound cheerful. But the mayor ignored her, turning to Linda instead. "Hello, Linda. Is it true that your boss fired you because you gave Mr. Jason here a free haircut?" the mayor asked. When the mayor asked, Linda noticed her boss subtly shaking her head, signaling Linda to lie. But Linda stood her ground. "Yes, Mayor, that's true. I was just about to leave before you walked in," Linda answered honestly. "For your kindness, Linda, the townspeople, and I have decided to reward you with a little something. This is to show our appreciation for your compassion and to encourage you to continue being the good person you are," the mayor said, handing Linda a certificate of recognition and a large white envelope. Linda's joy soared as she received the certificate and took a photo with the mayor. When she later opened the envelope and saw the amount of money inside, she could hardly contain her happiness. Grateful for the support, Linda made a decision that would change her life forever. A few months later, Linda opened her own beauty salon with the money she had received from the mayor. The townspeople, eager to support her, stopped going to Mora's beauty salon and chose to get their haircuts and braids done at Linda's new salon. The overwhelming success led to an expansion, with a second branch opening soon after, and Linda's income continued to grow. As for Sydney, she was forced to close her beauty salon after losing all her customers. She learned a hard lesson, but by then, it was too late to save her business. The true currency of life isn't money. It's the kindness we give and receive. Invest wisely. If you love this story, tap that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Let us know how this story made you feel with a single word in the comments.
After 4 long years since saying goodbye to her daughter and son-in-law, Abigail continued to fight an internal battle against the deep pain of loss. Yet during a walk with her grandchildren, something extraordinary happened. She saw the deceased couple. This seemingly impossible encounter was about to unravel dark mysteries. I hope you enjoy this story. Nothing is more chilling than watching the news and seeing the growing whirlwind of violence that plagues our times. But what happens when this cruel and cold reality, which we often watch as mere spectators, ruthlessly bursts through our door, sinking its sharp claws into our history? Mrs. Abigail experienced this anguish up close when cruel fate entered without warning, turning her life into a kaleidoscope of fear and despair. In an instant, her peaceful existence shattered like a broken mirror, reflecting a distorted reality. That evening, Abigail was preparing a delicious meal because her grandchildren were coming to stay the night. A tasty cake, the favorite of Amy and Charlie, her 3-year-old twin grandchildren, was already on the table. They were staying with their grandmother so that their parents, Mary and her husband, could attend a play they had been looking forward to. The house was filled with liveliness and joy upon the children's arrival. After the farewells, Abigail was left alone with the twins as the couple set off for their evening out. Abigail cherished having her grandchildren around. They were the light of her life. Together, they had fun, with Abigail sharing stories that made the children's eyes sparkle with excitement. Putting them to bed was easy after a day full of activities that left them exhausted. Meanwhile, not far away, Mary and her husband were enjoying a rare night out alone. Since the twins' arrival, moments like this had become increasingly scarce. But this night was special. It was meant to reignite the flame that time had threatened to extinguish. After the play ended, they decided to visit a restaurant that held memories from the early days of their relationship, a place filled with sighs and reminiscences. The restaurant was just a few blocks away from the theater, allowing them to savor the spring air and each other's company during a leisurely walk. Hand in hand, they strolled through the serene night, illuminated by soft moonlight and bright stars. A gentle breeze caressed their skin, and the scene felt like something out of a fairy tale, a perfect image that reminded them of the first pages of their love story. But as in all great tales, an unexpected twist was about to occur. As they chose a dark alley to shorten their journey, a terrifying scene unfolded before them. The street's darkness grew dense and ominous, and suddenly, a shadowy figure emerged from the shadows, gripping a weapon with menacing intent. Violence hung palpably in the air, and his sharp words cut through the silence as he demanded they hand over everything they had. Now faced with a life-or-death situation, the couple's hearts raced with fear. They knew they couldn't risk their lives for material possessions. With trembling hands, they began to hand over their belongings when suddenly the night's silence was pierced by the sharp sound of a police siren. The assailant, already on edge, flinched like a cornered animal. Panic overtook him, and without thinking, he abruptly fired the weapon at the couple. The gunshot echoed through the night, a single flash of light tearing through the darkness. Mary and her husband, now involuntary targets, were struck by the same bullet. The searing pain was followed by the reverberating sound of the gunshot bouncing off the alley walls. The ominous noise caught the attention of the approaching police, and a brief but intense chase unfolded, like shadows dancing in the night. Eventually, the assailant was cornered, and silence returned, an oppressive, heavy silence filled with tragedy. In that dark and unforgiving alley, fate had woven a treacherous path. Mary and her husband's bodies now lay lifeless on the cold ground, victims of a series of events beyond their control. The alley, a silent witness, held the secrets of that fateful night. In the early hours of the morning, a phone rang, shattering the silence with an urgency that made Abigail's heart race. She answered, and the news on the other end hit her like a lightning bolt, a shock that pierced deep into her soul. Her only daughter and son-in-law were dead, their lives snuffed out in an instant. The shock rippled through her like an emotional earthquake, shaking the very foundations of her world. Tears flowed as she grappled with a flood of complex and indescribable emotions. The void that opened before her seemed endless, a dark abyss threatening to swallow her whole. The cruelty of life being extinguished so senselessly was almost impossible to comprehend. Now, Abigail was faced with a new and daunting responsibility, raising her grandchildren, Amy and Charlie. These two young, curious souls, only 3 years old, carried the weight of losing their parents in a world they were just beginning to understand. Every day, their sad and innocent questions cut through the air. Where are Mommy and Daddy? How could she explain the profound absence of their beloved parents? How could she make them understand that they would never return? It was a heartbreaking task, a challenge for which no one is ever truly prepared. As time, relentless as always, moved forward, Abigail and the children found ways to cope with the loss. A new routine slowly emerged, a fragile balance between sorrow and the necessity to move on. Together, they began to build a narrative that honored the memory of the absent parents while allowing space for new joys. However, their approaches to dealing with the loss differed. The children surprisingly sought to remember and share stories about their parents, as if trying to keep them alive through words. Each memory became a thread that kept them connected to their past. Abigail, on the other hand, chose to carry her pain in silence. The wound was too deep, the loss a shadow that darkened every aspect of her life. Speaking about it, confronting the intensity of her grief, felt like tearing her heart apart over and over again. 4 years passed since that dreadful night. The twins, now 7 years old, had found in their grandmother a source of love and care. Yet Abigail felt an immense burden on her shoulders, a responsibility that went beyond mere caregiving. The task before her was monumental, to raise these two children to be kind, compassionate, and resilient despite the tragedy that had marked their early lives. Despite everything, it was school vacation time, and a friend of Abigail's, sensing the need for a break, extended a thoughtful invitation. She invited Abigail and her grandchildren for a few days' retreat at a cozy cabin in the mountains. The idea of escaping the daily routine, leaving worries behind, and offering the children a chance for fun and relaxation brought a rare smile to Abigail's face. The scenery was breathtaking, the cabin nestled in the heart of the mountain, blending seamlessly with the wild beauty of the landscape. Surrounding them, nature unfolded in all its splendor, with the final touch of beauty being the panoramic view of a large lake at the mountain's base, reflecting the sky like a mirror. The children, full of energy and excitement, immediately set out to explore their surroundings. Abigail watched with tenderness as they embarked on this new adventure, but ever the concerned guardian, she reminded them not to venture too far into the forest and to stay close to the cabin so they wouldn't get lost. As the first day turned to dusk, the sun cast warm, golden hues across the horizon. The children continued to play outside while Abigail and her friend prepared dinner. Then the peaceful retreat took an unexpected and alarming turn. Abigail's granddaughter, Amy, suddenly rushed into the cabin, her breath uneven and her eyes wide with urgency. The small, panting figure carried an unsettling restlessness as she recounted a story that froze the air in the room. Amy explained that she and her brother Charlie had been playing hide and seek in the nearby forest, but the game took a terrifying turn when she lost track of Charlie. Despite her insistent calls, there was no response from him. Abigail's friend, familiar with the area, immediately recognized the danger. The forest was a labyrinth of tangled trees and hidden paths, a place where a young child could easily become disoriented. Realizing the urgency, she grabbed the phone and began calling other nearby residents. The gravity of the situation quickly mobilized the community into action. As daylight dwindled, each passing minute made the search more challenging. Shadows grew longer, swallowing the clues that could lead to Charlie. The searchers pressed on, their lanterns cutting through the darkness like stars in a night sky. But strangely, it was as if Charlie had vanished, his footsteps swallowed by the forest. Amy, standing by the searchers, did her best to provide information about where she and Charlie had been, but her resilience was beginning to crumble. She was like a house of cards, unable to withstand the growing storm of fear and exhaustion. Abigail's friend, noticing Amy's exhausted state, suggested that she be taken back to the cabin to rest. Promising that the search would continue, she reassured Amy that everything would be okay. Tenderly supporting her granddaughter, Abigail led her back to the cabin. Inside, as they lay together, Abigail stroked Amy's hair, trying to provide comfort. The fatigue of the tumultuous day weighed heavily on her as well, and her mind was a whirlwind of worries and silent prayers. As Amy's eyes slowly closed, carried away by exhaustion, Abigail too succumbed to sleep, though it was restless, an uneasy dance of dreams and worries intertwining in a whirlpool of thoughts. In this half-dreaming state, Abigail experienced something that seemed to transcend the bounds of mere dreaming. Her eyes, though closed, saw with a clarity she had never known. It was a dream, yet so vivid and tangible that she could feel every breeze, every detail of the environment around her. In that vivid dream, Abigail found herself standing in the cabin, looking out the window. But what she saw through the glass defied all explanation. There before her stood her daughter and son-in-law, the very ones who had been taken by tragedy 4 years ago. Abigail's heart raced as she watched them. Their smiles were radiant, their eyes filled with a peace she could hardly comprehend. An invisible force seemed to draw her, a silent call she couldn't ignore. Without hesitation, she followed the couple as they stepped into the forest, each of their movements like a beacon guiding her way. Abigail's heart pounded as she followed, her feet moving with determination, yet no matter how hard she tried, they remained just out of reach. Their hands were intertwined, their faces calm and serene as they ventured deeper into the forest. Their figures gradually blended with the night shadows until finally they stopped. Before them lay a small crevice in the mountain, an entrance to a tiny cave. Abigail's heart raced, her emotions swirling. She met her daughter Mary's gaze, and in that moment, Mary's smile shone like a gentle light. Her words echoed in Abigail's mind. Thank you, Mom, for taking care of my babies. With a sudden jolt, Abigail woke up, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. She sat up in bed, looking beside her where Amy slept peacefully, unaware of the profound journey her grandmother had just experienced. Without hesitation, Abigail rushed out of the cabin, her heart pounding with urgency. She called out, I know where Charlie is. Her words were a mix of desperation and conviction as she asked if anyone knew of a small cave in the forest, one that matched the description she had seen in her dream. The words flowed from her with a confidence she didn't fully understand. The small cave Abigail described wasn't far from the cabin. The volunteers quickly gathered their lanterns and ventured into the forest. And there, inside the crevice in the mountain, was Charlie. His small, brave figure was bathed in the light of the lanterns, his face a mixture of surprise and relief. Abigail was overcome with awe and gratitude. It felt as if angels, her deceased daughter and son-in-law, had guided her to Charlie through that vision, existing at the edge between dream and reality. The sensation was indescribable, transcending mere words. This experience profoundly changed how Abigail lived with her grief and longing for her lost daughter. The grief hadn't disappeared, but it had found a place where it could coexist with a newfound sense of comfort. Abigail began to find joy in memories of her daughter, not just in tears and sadness, but also in shared laughter and moments filled with love. The vision had brought her deep peace, especially in her role of raising her grandchildren. She had seen Mary's smile and felt her gratitude in that vision, a silent confirmation that she was doing a good job. And so, in the quiet of that night in the mountains, Abigail found a peace she could never have predicted. Whether it was a dream, a gift from heaven, or something beyond human understanding, the vision had transformed her pain into something more, something that transcended sadness. If you enjoyed the story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel Stam Talk. Leave a comment with a number from 1 to 10 to let us know how much you liked it. Also, be sure to check out the video currently on your screen. See you soon. I'm Sophia, and this is the story of how my life was turned upside down. But let's start from the beginning. I grew up in a wealthy family, the only child of doting parents who gave me everything I could ever want. My father, Robert, was a successful businessman, and my mother, Eleanor, was a socialite known for throwing the best parties in town. They showered me with love and attention, making sure I never lacked anything. When I entered college, I was determined to make my parents proud. I buried myself in books, focusing solely on my studies. That's when Tom came into my life. He was persistent. I'll give him that. He'd wait for me after classes, bring me coffee during late-night study sessions, and even showed up at my parents' house one day. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," he said, standing tall in our living room, "I'm in love with your daughter, and I want you to know my intentions are serious." My father was impressed. He'd always wanted a son, someone to take under his wing and groom for the business world. Tom seemed to fit the bill perfectly. "Sophia," my father said to me later that evening, "why don't you give this young man a chance? He seems like a good catch." Reluctantly, I agreed to go on a date with Tom, and to my surprise, I found myself enjoying his company. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams. Our relationship blossomed quickly, and before I knew it, we were walking down the aisle, fresh out of college. My parents were overjoyed, especially my father, who saw Tom as the son he never had. "Welcome to the family, son," my father said, clapping Tom on the back at our wedding reception. "I have big plans for us." True to his word, my father helped Tom start his own business, a state-of-the-art car wash. He bought all the necessary equipment and even helped us purchase a small, cozy house. A year into our marriage, I gave birth to our son, Michael. Holding him in my arms for the first time, I felt a love I had never experienced before. I threw myself into motherhood, becoming a full-time housewife. My days were filled with diaper changes, feeding schedules, and lullabies. As the years passed, our lives settled into a routine. Michael grew from a gurgling baby into a curious toddler, then a mischievous child, and finally, a brooding teenager. I poured my heart and soul into raising him while Tom continued to struggle with the car wash business. "Your father thinks I'm a failure," Tom spat one evening after another tense phone call. "He's always looking down on me, giving me handouts like I'm some charity case." I tried to reassure him. "That's not true, Tom. Dad's just trying to help." But these arguments became more frequent, and I found myself walking on eggshells in my own home. Michael, now in his late teens, began to withdraw, spending more time in his room or out with friends. As for me, the years of stress and housework had taken their toll. I was no longer the slim college girl Tom had wooed. My once toned body had softened, and I had gained weight. Tom didn't hesitate to point this out. "You've really let yourself go, Sophia," he'd say, eyeing me with disappointment. "What happened to that pretty girl I married?" His words stung, but I tried to brush them off. I told myself he was just stressed about work and didn't really mean it. But deep down, I knew our marriage was crumbling. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a sunny Tuesday when I received the call that would shatter my world. "Mrs. Thompson," a somber voice said, "I'm afraid there's been an accident. Your parents, they were in a small plane crash in Hawaii. I'm so sorry, but they didn't survive." The next few weeks passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and paperwork. Tom was surprisingly absent during this time, leaving me to handle everything on my own. When he was around, he seemed almost cheerful. "We need to sort out the inheritance," he said barely a week after the funeral. "Have you spoken to the lawyer yet?" I was shocked by his insensitivity. "Tom, I'm still grieving." "Can't this wait?" He shrugged. "Business doesn't wait, Sophia. We need to know where we stand financially." Reluctantly, I agreed to meet with the family lawyer, Mr. Jacobson. As we sat in his plush office, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mrs. Thompson, your parents' will is unusual. It's divided into two parts. I can only reveal the first part now. The second part will be disclosed in exactly 1 year." Tom leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "Well, what does the first part say?" Mr. Jacobson adjusted his glasses. "Your parents have left their mansion to your future grandchildren, with their guardians as trustees until they come of age." I was stunned. "But Michael is our only child, and he's not even married yet." As if on cue, Michael, who had insisted on coming to the meeting, let out a low whistle. "Well, that opens up some interesting possibilities, doesn't it?" I turned to look at my son, confused by his reaction, but he avoided my gaze. Tom, on the other hand, was fuming. "That's it?" he demanded. "What about the rest of their assets, the businesses, the money?" Mr. Jacobson shook his head. "I'm afraid that information is in the second part of the will, which cannot be revealed for another year." As we left the lawyer's office, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Tom was uncharacteristically quiet, while Michael seemed lost in thought. Just a few weeks after the reading of the will, Michael dropped a bombshell that left me reeling. "Mom, Dad," he announced one evening at dinner, I have someone I want you to meet." The next day, he brought home a young woman named Sarah. She was pretty, with long blonde hair and a saccharine smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "This is my wife," Michael said, his arm around her waist, "and she's pregnant with our child." I nearly choked on my tea. Wife? Pregnant? But when did all this happen? Michael shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "We've been dating for a while. When we found out about the baby, we decided to get married right away." I couldn't help but notice how his eyes flickered to Tom, who was nodding approvingly. Something about this whole situation felt off. But I pushed my doubts aside. After all, I was going to be a grandmother. "Well, congratulations," I said, trying to muster up some enthusiasm. "This is quite a surprise." Sarah's smile widened. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I'm so excited to be part of your family." From that day on, our household dynamics shifted dramatically. Sarah moved in, citing the need to be close to family during her pregnancy. At first, I was thrilled to have a female companion in the house. However, it quickly became apparent that Sarah had her own agenda. She began to subtly undermine me at every turn. When I cooked dinner, she'd wrinkle her nose and say, "Oh, is that how you make it?" I always thought it was done differently. But it was her interactions with Tom that really set off alarm bells. She'd laugh at his jokes, touch his arm, and shower him with compliments. "You're such a talented businessman, Tom," she'd coo. "I don't know how you manage it all." Tom predictably lapped up the attention. He began spending more time at home. But not with me. He'd sit for hours talking business with Sarah. While I was pushed to the background, I tried to talk to Michael about Sarah's behavior, but he brushed off my concerns. "Mom, you're just being paranoid," he'd say. "Sarah's great. Maybe you're just jealous because you're not the center of attention anymore." His words hurt more than he could ever know. Had I really raised a son who cared so little for his mother's feelings? As for Tom, he seemed to revel in the new family dynamic. He beamed with pride whenever Sarah complimented him, and I often caught him looking at me with something akin to disgust. One day, while I was out grocery shopping, I ran into an old college friend, Jessica. We decided to catch up over coffee, and as we reminisced about our college days, she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "Remember that guy who was always chasing rich girls?" Jessica asked. "What was his name?" "Tom something." My heart skipped a beat. "Tom? Tom who?" Jessica laughed. "Oh, you know, that sleazy guy who tried to date every girl with wealthy parents. He ended up marrying some naive rich girl, if I remember correctly." As Jessica continued talking, describing Tom's behavior in college, I felt like I was going to be sick. The Tom she was describing sounded exactly like my husband. Had our entire marriage been based on a lie? With a heavy heart and shaking hands, I pulled into our driveway. The house loomed before me, no longer the cozy home I once loved, but a stage for the drama that was about to unfold. I found Tom in his study, poring over some papers. He barely looked up when I entered. "Tom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "we need to talk." He sighed, finally meeting my eyes. "What is it now, Sophia?" I took a deep breath. "I ran into Jessica today. You remember her from college, right?" A flicker of something, was it fear, passed across his face before he schooled his features into indifference. Vaguely. "What about her?" "She told me about a guy in college, a guy who pursued rich girls, looking for an easy meal ticket." I paused, watching his reaction. "Sound familiar, Tom?" For a moment, he just stared at me. Then, to my shock, he started laughing. "Well, well," he chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Took you long enough to figure it out, didn't it?" His cavalier attitude stunned me. "So it's true? You married me for my parents' money." Tom shrugged, not a hint of remorse in his eyes. "Of course I did. Look, Sophia, I never loved you. I tolerated you because you were my meal ticket. But now you're just a fat, useless burden." His words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered back, tears welling in my eyes. "Why are you telling me this now?" I whispered. A cruel smile twisted his lips. "Because, my dear wife, I don't need you anymore. Your parents are dead, and soon their fortune will be mine. Or rather, our grandsons, which amounts to the same thing." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Michael's hasty marriage, Sarah's convenient pregnancy, the way they'd been treating me. It had all been a calculated move to secure my parents' inheritance. You planned all this?" I gasped. Tom laughed again, the sound grating on my nerves. Give credit where it's due, it was mostly Michael's idea. The boy's got a good head for business, unlike his mother. I felt like I was drowning, the weight of their betrayal crushing me. Does Sarah know about this? Of course she does, Tom sneered. She's a smart girl, knows a good opportunity when she sees one. Unlike you, she'll make a proper wife for a businessman. I couldn't take any more. I turned and fled from the room, my world shattered around me. As the reality of my situation sank in, I realized I had nowhere to go. I had no money of my own, not even enough to rent an apartment. With a heavy heart, I resigned myself to staying in the house with people I could no longer trust. 2 months later, Tom dropped another bombshell on me. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he strolled in with a self-satisfied smirk on his face. "Pack your bags, Lydia," he announced without preamble. "We're moving into your parents' house." I nearly dropped the knife I was holding. "What? When did we decide this?" Tom's laugh was cold and mocking. "We didn't decide anything. I decided. We're moving in with Michael and Sarah. After all, our grandson is the heir to that house." Each word was like a slap to my face. "What do you mean? What about our house?" "Oh, that?" Tom waved dismissively. "I sold it. The money's already been spent on things for people I actually care about. And just so we're clear, you're not on that list." Over the next few days, I watched in stunned silence as Tom, Michael, and Sarah excitedly prepared for the move. They bought new cars, splurged on expensive clothes and gadgets, all while I faded into the background, ignored and forgotten. The move to my parents' house was like a twisted parody of a happy family relocation. Sarah immediately claimed the master bedroom, while I was relegated to a small guest room in the back of the house. As the days passed, I found myself increasingly isolated. Sarah gave birth to my grandson and began delegating all the housework to me. I cooked, cleaned, and even cared for my grandson while she lounged about, issuing orders like a queen. "Sophia," she'd call out, "the baby needs changing. And while you're at it, could you tidy up the living room? It's looking a bit messy." I threw myself into caring for my grandson, the only thing keeping me going in a life that had become unrecognizable. Finding solace in my grandson's innocent smiles and gurgles, I clung to those moments of joy, even though they were tainted by the constant barbs and criticism from Sarah and Tom. One evening, about a month after we had moved in, things came to a head. We were all seated at the dinner table, a dinner I had prepared, as usual. Sarah was in rare form, ordering me around as if I were a servant. "Sophia, fetch me some more water and hurry up with clearing these plates. We don't have all night," she snapped. Something in me snapped too. Years of pent-up frustration and hurt came pouring out. "Enough," I shouted, slamming my hands on the table. "I am not your maid, Sarah. This is my parents' house, and I deserve some respect." The room fell silent. Sarah's face crumpled, and she burst into dramatic tears. "How could you speak to me like that after all we've done for you?" she wailed. Tom stood up, his face red with anger. "That's it, Sophia. I've had enough of your ingratitude. Pack your things and get out. This house belongs to our grandson now, and you're no longer welcome here." I stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious. Where am I supposed to go?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of papers. "I've been waiting for the right moment to give you these." He tossed them on the table. "Divorce papers. Already signed. I want you gone by morning." I looked to Michael, hoping against hope that my son would defend me. But he just shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I'm an adult now, Mom. I don't need you anymore." With shaking hands, I took the divorce papers. Sarah's triumphant smirk was the last thing I saw as I turned and walked out of the dining room, my world crumbling around me. With nowhere to go and my life in shambles, I found myself dialing a familiar number. Jessica, my old college friend, answered on the second ring. "Lydia, is everything okay?" Her voice was laced with concern. I swallowed hard. "Not really. I need a place to stay." Without hesitation, Jessica invited me to her home. As I settled into her guest room, she shared her own family drama. "My son's been going through hell," she confided. "His fiancée left him, and she's pregnant. He's desperate to find her and be there for his child." My heart skipped a beat. "Do you have a picture of her?" Jessica nodded, pulling out her phone. As she showed me the photo, my blood ran cold. Staring back at me was Sarah, my supposed daughter-in-law. "Jessica," I said slowly, I think I know where your son's fiancé is. Over cups of tea, I poured out my story. Jessica listened, her expression morphing from shock to anger to determination. We need to expose them, she declared. Together, we hashed a plan. The next day, I returned to my parents' house under the guise of collecting the last of my belongings. While there, I managed to snag a few strands of my grandson's hair for a DNA test. The wait for the results was agonizing. But when they finally came, they confirmed our suspicions. My son was not the father of Sarah's baby, Jessica's son was. As I grappled with how to break this news to Michael and Tom, my phone rang. It was Mr. Jacobson, my parents' lawyer. Mrs. Thompson, he said, it's time to review the second part of your parents' will. Can you come to my office tomorrow? The next day, I sat in Mr. Jacobson's plush office, my heart pounding as he read the will. I could hardly believe my ears. To our beloved daughter Sophia, he read, we leave our luxury apartment valued at $500,000. But that wasn't all. My parents had foreseen everything. In the event of a divorce, Mr. Jacobson continued, all their property, including Tom's business, will come to you. Your father wants you to know that he's been the one financing Tom's business all along. He registered it in his own name in case of divorce. It's yours to do with as you please. I sat there stunned. All this time, I thought I had nothing, when in reality, I had everything. What about the house Tom and I lived in? I asked, remembering he had sold it. Mr. Jacobson smiled. That's the only thing Tom can claim. Everything else is yours. As the reality of my new situation sank in, I couldn't help but laugh. Tom had thought he was so clever, but in the end he had outsmarted himself. Stepping into my new apartment, I gasped. The space was breathtaking, sleek lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and tasteful furnishings all around. For the first time in years, I felt truly at home. As I explored my new sanctuary, my phone rang. It was Michael. Mom, he said, his tone demanding and entitled. It's been a year since the first part of the will was read. We need to know what's in the second part. I'm sure Grandpa and Grandma left everything to me, right? I couldn't help but chuckle inwardly at his presumption. Michael, this isn't a conversation we should have over the phone. Why don't you, Sarah, and your father come over tomorrow morning? I'll text you the address. After hanging up, I called Jessica. It's time, I told her. Can you come over tomorrow morning? We're going to settle this once and for all. The next day, the doorbell rang. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door to find Tom, Michael, Sarah, and the baby standing there. Their jaws dropped as they took in the luxurious surroundings. Michael whistled. Wow, Mom, this place is amazing. I can't wait to move in. Sarah's eyes gleamed with greed. Yes, it'll be so nice once we get rid of all this old lady decor. And of course, once we get rid of you, Sophia. I raised an eyebrow. I wouldn't be so hasty if I were you. Please come in and have a seat. As they settled onto the plush sofa, I excused myself for a moment. When I returned, I wasn't alone. Jessica stood beside me, her presence causing Sarah to pale visibly. Before we discussed the will, I began, my voice steady. There's someone I'd like you all to meet. This is my friend Jessica. Sarah's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. Michael and Tom just looked confused. Now, I continued, I think it's time we all had a frank discussion. There are some truths that need to be revealed. I paused, savoring the moment. All night, I had rehearsed what I was about to say. The words I had practiced, the revelations I was about to make, would change everything. As I looked at the faces of those who had betrayed me, my ex-husband, my son, and the woman who had tried to steal my life, I felt a surge of righteous anger mixed with anticipation. As Jessica stepped closer, Tom's eyes widened with recognition. A smirk spread across his face as he let out a bitter laugh. Well, he sneered, gesturing toward me. Looks like I achieved my goal after all. Married a rich fool, didn't I? His words stung, but I held my ground. We'll address your betrayal later, Tom. Right now, there's something more pressing to discuss. I turned to Sarah, who was visibly squirming. We know the truth about you, Sarah. Michael looked confused. Mom, what are you talking about? I took a deep breath. Sarah was looking for a rich husband. When she heard about the will from you, Michael, she saw an opportunity. She decided to pass off someone else's child as your own to get her hands on your grandparents' estate. Jessica stepped forward, her voice steady. The baby isn't Michael's. It's my son's child. The room fell silent. Then I produced the DNA test results. Sarah's face drained of color as realization dawned. In a flurry of movement, Sarah grabbed her bag. I don't need this. I don't need a beggar's child, she shouted as she fled the apartment. Michael stood there, shell-shocked, the baby still in his arms. He looked lost, pathetic even. Tom, recovering from the initial shock, asked in a small voice, "So who gets this apartment?" I couldn't help but smile. "Well, Tom, let me enlighten you about the second part of my parents' will." I explained everything, the apartment, the car wash, all of it. Tom's face fell with each revelation. Suddenly, Tom was on his knees. "Sophia, please, I'm sorry. Forgive me. We can work this out." I looked at him coldly. "Get out, Tom. You have 2 days to leave my parents' house, or I'm calling the police." As Tom scrambled to his feet, he turned to Michael. "Son, give me the car I bought you. I need something." Michael's response was curt. "No, it's mine. You're not getting anything from me." With one last desperate look, Tom slunk out of the apartment. I then turned to Michael, who stood there, head bowed in shame. Jessica gently took the baby from his arms. "Michael," I said, my voice firm but not unkind, "since it turns out I don't have any grandchildren, there are no other heirs to your grandparents' home besides me. I need you to move out as well." He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. I'll go pack my things." With that, he too left the apartment. As the door closed behind him, I let out a long breath. The apartment was quiet now, save for the soft coo of the baby in Jessica's arms. I looked at my old friend, feeling a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a strange sense of liberation. "Well," I said, managing a small smile, "that didn't go quite how I expected when I woke up this morning." Jessica nodded, bouncing the baby gently. "You did what you had to do, Sophia. They left you no choice." As I sank onto the plush sofa, I realized that for the first time in years, I was truly free from deception, free from manipulation, and free to live life on my own terms. The months following the confrontation flew by in a whirlwind of change and self-discovery. I found myself settling into my luxurious apartment, the space becoming a sanctuary of peace and new beginnings. One of my first decisions was to rent out my parents' house. It felt right somehow to have the property occupied by a young family who appreciated its warmth and history. The rental income provided a comfortable cushion, adding to the proceeds from selling Tom's car wash business. My friendship with Jessica blossomed. We'd meet for coffee, sharing stories and supporting each other through the ups and downs of our new realities. And then there was little Tommy, Jessica's grandson, the child I had once believed to be my own. Despite the painful circumstances of his birth, I found myself developing a deep affection for the boy. "He has your eyes," Jessica would joke during our visits, and we'd laugh, finding humor in the absurdity of our intertwined lives. My relationship with Michael was a work in progress. The betrayal had cut deep, but he was still my son, and I couldn't bring myself to sever that bond completely. Our interactions were tentative at first, awkward phone calls and stilted meetings in neutral coffee shops. But slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild. As for Tom, he became a ghost in my past. I heard through the grapevine that he'd fallen on hard times, his grandiose dreams of wealth and status crumbling in the wake of his exposed deceit. I saw him only once by chance as I was driving through town. He was working at a small kiosk, looking older and wearier than I remembered. For a moment, our eyes met, and I felt the flicker of something, not love or longing, but a kind of closure. Then the light changed, and I drove on, leaving that chapter of my life firmly in the rearview mirror.